California Frontier Show, Episode 16. I'm Damian Bassage, and this is California Frontier, the show about the fascinating history of California and the West. So you spent a lot of your life at this presidio. What made you write the book?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, I did this book on the Getty Villa when COVID hit, before COVID and during COVID, and Norman Neuerberg is the subject of the book because he's the mastermind behind it. But I have a fellow historian friend, Alfred Runte, who's written a book. It's on the national parks. It's the book on the national parks. It's in its sixth edition. He and I did our doctorates together at UC Santa Barbara back in the 70s, and we're still pals. We're really good friends. He said, you need to write up your years at the trust and how that park. He's a parks person. He said how the Presidio State Park was formed, who were the people involved with it, et cetera. And he said that's a really important story. And then my wife said, well, you know, I saw you suffering through all the things that you had to do there and the achievements that happened, and the people should know about what it took to build a presidio originally and then to rebuild it. And that was one of the things in the story that I tell about the early years, what it took. This was no small achievement to build a fort on a frontier with just the Spanish laborers and soldiers, and with the Indians who were paid to help build the presidio. Over 300,000 adobe blocks were needed, weighing 55 pounds each. Timbers had to be floated down from Monterey and were taken down also from the forest here in Santa Barbara, and had to be dragged down by horses and mules and carretas down to the here. It took about 5 years to do this, and they would build one wing per year. That would be the front gate section, then the side section, then the back section, and then the other side. And then they closed the gap. It took them about 5 years in total. They built a wood structure before that. So then, as the Presidio adobes went up, then they would tear down the beams that were and close the Presidio before that. So that part of the story is really interesting. And I think how this thing came back, I think about it, coming into downtown, buying up what amounts to 4 blocks of sections, almost a total block of downtown real estate to bring back an old mud fort. And people kind of, there's some romanticizing of it, obviously it was harsh. It was a small place out on the frontier, but it's the people in the town really took to it, and some very interesting people. Pearl Chase, who was a force of nature, she was described, founded the trust and really pushed the project. Russell Rua is a descendant of Goicoechea. He was the artist historian. Richard Whitehead, an MIT graduate, mapped the Presidio, and found these original maps, and then laid it over the street. And then Jerry Haas went out and did all the real estate. The politics of it are really fascinating. Going to Sacramento, Jerry Haas's father was friends with Ronald, not close friends, but knew Ronald Reagan, and that transitioned into the Edmund Brown period, and how they were able to get appropriations to buy the properties, all sort of quietly buying up properties. And then suddenly the community realizes that, this thing can happen. They're going to close streets, and it became a highly controversial project for about 8 years. We had public hearings for a long time on this project. Must have been a couple hundred meetings. Seriously, we were meeting once a week, sometimes more than that, to work out the details of how much Presidio was going to be built. And we finally made it through. And then there's these side stories that the trust is giving this really important El Paseo shopping mall that was built in the 20s that was wrapped around the De La Guerra adobe. And in our infinite wisdom, we decided to sell the property but save the De La Guerra adobe. And I'd say it turned out to be a wise decision. But all these stories, and then to bring it up to the San Ynez Mills, which is part of the San Ynez Mission, which is part of the Presidio Military District. We got ourselves involved up there, and the trust is now kind of the operator of that San Ynez Mills area, which is yet to be developed. So I think as I'm going on here, you can see there's quite a story that it's represented at the Presidio, and it was really interesting during COVID. And a lot of this writing was going on. I was typing away like crazy, and it came out pretty quickly. And people laugh when I say this, but I would give it people to read, and they say, it's got a coherent narrative to it. It does flow, and they said you definitely should try to publish this, and there it is for everybody to read now.
How did you wind up there at Santa Barbara Presidio, what is today? And when you got the job, did you think you'd be building a Presidio from scratch, rebuilding a Presidio?
Well, let me point out that a lot of work, the book points out, a lot of work was done by the people before I got there. A lot of acquisition, and they had rebuilt what's called the Padres quarters, 2-3 rooms next to where the chapel foundations were. So they had actually done something. Well, yeah, I got hired, and they told me, this is the job. Do you want it? They didn't quite say it that way, but basically they said you'll be in charge of building it. And I didn't have any real building experience. What I did have was research experience, and that is an extremely important element of any kind of historical reconstruction. You have to dig in and find out lots of things about it. We had maps, we had archaeology and so forth. So, and I had minimal experience working as a public historian in Alexandria, Virginia, when my wife was working in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and then we came back to California. And I'm sure I knew some people who were on the board who knew me from my graduate days, so that probably influenced how I got the job. And there was no looking back. I mean, I learned a lot about the kinds of history that you don't think about, and that is, oh yeah, they just showed up here and built it. They just showed up and built an old fort. No big deal. No, it is a big deal how you have to coordinate these kind of things back then and then today. In some ways, it's just as hard today with all the permitting you have to do, and we have to get approvals from the state, the city, and then I have to get the board of directors on board with things, and they're usually on board. But you have to go back and forth with this, and then you have to go out and raise the money. The Spaniards had funds set aside to build the fort, but we had to go knocking on the doors of foundations and individuals to raise the money, because the state commitment was to buy the land. Your job, Santa Barbara Trust, is to go out and find the money to rebuild it, and we'll tell you whether we accept the way you want to rebuild it or not. And that's what I say, accepted. They wanted to make sure it was done in a professional way. And we haven't got time today to talk about. The book does show how the trust evolved its process of rebuilding. Made some mistakes when we restored the original couple of rooms of the Presidio by using bricks that were amended. That is, we put things in them that we shouldn't have, and then had concrete floors in areas where they shouldn't have been, et cetera. So, and then we evolved how we preserve foundations over the years, et cetera. So there's some nice stories in there from a historic reconstruction point of view. And I learned all that, and I really appreciate the people who were involved. There were really some smart people. And Richard Whitehead was an engineer who could really figure things out. And we had Wayne Donaldson. I think you know Wayne.
Yes, I know Wayne.
State preservation officer. He was our architect. and he wrote the foreword for the book, and we would be going back and forth and so forth. So if I'm sounding a little excited even after these many years being away from it, it's because it was pretty interesting. And there's more work to do, Damian. There really is, and the trust needs to get back to that. I hope in the future.
You mentioned it was controversial. What was controversial about rebuilding the Presidio there in Santa Barbara?
Well, closing streets. I mean, too heavy traffic streets environmentally. Automobiles, cars go through there. Oh, you're going to cause huge traffic jams. It's really funny now, though. It's how everybody wants to get people out of their cars, and we just had a apartment building approved with no parking in Santa Barbara. Can you imagine that? 20 units, no parking. Because it forced people out of their automobiles but that was a big, we had to do environmental traffic studies, et cetera. And the other thing was, hey, it's a fake Presidio, it's gone, and we're going to bring something back. And there's other history here, Japanese, Chinese history, you guys. That's real history. And I actually took pause with that because I thought that's an extreme argument, but it does have some validity that there is some other history there. And in my final chapter of the book, I mentioned that the trust should, and the state should consider rebuilding the Asakura Hotel, which is outside the footprint of the Presidio, right? They should really think about that and interpret the Japanese history of that site, which started in about 1900 and went to the internment period of 1942. And then the Japanese community came back, and there's a Buddhist church there, and we put on events. And so they thought, and then you're putting this fake history. Well, the fake history side is they don't know how much effort goes into thinking about what was there. And what you see at that Presidio today is pretty much what was there, with the adobe walls, the type of roofing material, the tiles, et cetera. We know that we actually excavated a tile that had fallen down and not broken, and dirt had covered it, as an original roof tile. So we from over by the northeast corner, and we could use that as the model for creating the thousands of roof tiles that we made for the stuff that we rebuilt so far. So those were the two main. There's the two main issues, and just ordinary people. Oh, it's a Disneyland, Of course, I don't know. People like Disneyland. People go to it. I certainly don't want Santa Barbara to be overrun with 50,000 people a day, but people do like to go see the history, and probably the numbers will increase. And I do think you're bringing up something. It's you brought it up earlier. It's kind of the major draw. There's other things. There's a great courthouse in downtown Santa Barbara, but the Presidio, if they continue to develop it, there's more rooms could be developed. Not closing the streets, they can leave those open and put the stonework across the streets. And there's some more walls they could build. They could walk around the Presidio. It would be a real asset to the community in the future. And I think it'll happen, but who knows when, and if it absolutely will happen, you never know for sure.
So if like I mentioned, I've been there before a number of times. If a first-time visitor to Santa Barbara, say family with kids, were to go visit the Presidio as it is today, what would they see? What would you what would the experience be like?
Yeah, well, there is a visitor center. So, and I noticed, I just got notification that they've now got all of the exhibit panels text both in bilingually with English and Spanish,
Excellent.
which is really important. But there's a lot to see. I mean, there's the chapel, there's the comandancia, the commander's quarters, and that's all part of it. You just go in and I think I don't know what the fees are right now because I haven't been down there for a while, but maybe
Whatever state
$5.
historical parks are, yeah.
Yeah, it's nominal fees, and it's good for kids walking around. And there's the chapel, and then, as mentioned, the commandancia, and then across the street there's some exhibits. showing the rooms that the officers lived in one section, and then there's the two stories tower. It's a very strong visual feeling of the site, and I think it needs more of that. Will ever be satisfied until the whole thing is built. Well, I do think there's plenty there to see now, and then if they finish the wall behind the chapel, which will completely enclose that section, and then have a walkway around it, that'll really add something to the park. But you get a lot of that feeling right now, and there's a lot of panels that state parks did fund that describe the various sections without even going into the buildings. They're along the sidewalks that you can see them. So there's quite an experience, and as you point out, it's really the only place where a presidio is being interpreted where you got visitors coming. I mean, there's another presidio down in Texas, Damian, but it's so far away from anything. They get like 4,000 visitors a year, contrast to the trust. I don't know what their numbers are, but if you count the people walking by outside every day looking at it and don't go in the museum, it's over 100,000 a year.
Wow.
So,
something it made me think of when you're talking about the visiting the presidio is the whole role of, I don't know what you want to call it, living history, et cetera, because I know there's the soldados there at Santa Barbara, Michael Hardwick, you guys like to dress up as in period costume. And I think that's one of the things that sort of lends a lot of texture, interest, et cetera, to this whole experience of the presidio. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement with that aspect of things?
Well, I kind of got into it. I got my own uniform and so forth. I never would have thought I would have, but I kind of liked it because, again, you put together a uniform and you think about what they wore, what the common soldier wore, and so forth. But I have to say, Damian, the soldier group is not doing so well right at the moment, and that it has to do with the fact that this generation of about half of which were Presidio soldiers or descendants of Presidio soldiers have died or don't participate because of age anymore, and we need to reinvigorate that. I had talked to the police. It's like a police academy nonprofit that they like the idea of getting Latino kids, boys and girls, outfitted and teaching them what a Spanish Mexican soldier was like on the frontier. And I'm glad you brought that up because I hope that sometime in the future that's reinvigorated. It's not happening right now, but it can. As you know, it really adds something when they come marching in. And when we had the Prince of Asturias, the Prince of Spain, come visit us, we put on a real wonderful program with the soldiers marching in and giving him an award and making him an honorary comandante and this kind of thing. And then he came back and he did the original in 1995 and then came back in 2013 for another visit to Santa Barbara, had a reception with the soldiers and so forth. So we need that. We really, and I don't have a problem with it. Some people think you're just playing soldier, but there's quite a learning experience and the kids like it. And some of the adults get into it as well. So it's good. I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's really something that we got to make sure it keeps happening in the future. So we don't just have buildings, but we have living people explaining the history.
Yeah, exactly. Could you just talk a little bit more about the experience of having Prince Felipe and later King Felipe visiting the Presidio, and what was sort of his take on this whole thing, and what was your experience of that?
Well, first of all, you can imagine you have the book and you see his photos are in there.
Right.
I sent a copy down to the Consul General of the book, and Victoria's the office assistant, been there for years, said we're making the arrangements to send it off to the king, so the book will eventually end up in one of his palaces. He really liked it. He had kind of a sense of humor about it. I don't know, and I don't know if you remember, but one of the pages Jim Martinez is giving a talk. He has a scroll rolled up, and he's talking about this is this and this is where the king of Spain came out. Blah, blah, blah. He's reading some of it in Spanish, and you can see the row of people there with these big grins on their face, including the prince. And on the one side of the prince was the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, which is like our Secretary of State, who came on this visit. The other side of him was the Spanish ambassador to the United States, and they all were having a really good time, enjoying it and appreciating it. This is why I think the project is important. This whole thing in our world today, we talk about neighborhood parks. They're really important, but it's also important to have international connections, that these histories that cross over with one another. And then the Spanish really appreciate it, and he did too. When he came in 1995, it was on every Spanish news station. I had a friend who did many of the arrangements, and her mother called her from Barcelona and says, "It's on every television station. I saw you. You're out there having fun in the Santa Barbara Presidio." So that is he really enjoyed it. And the Spanish said to me a number of times that it's the one place in California where you get a non-mission history. There's
Right.
nothing wrong with the mission history being interpreted, but this is the one place where you get on military civilian history that was a very important part of the early years of California.
Right. So I want to be respectful of your time, of course. What I noticed that there is an appendix in the back of the book. Talk a little bit about that appendix that you added.
Well, so I couldn't get everything in the book, and obviously, even with this appendix, you can't get everything. I mean, 35 years is a long time, and you meet a lot of people. And sometimes I wake up in the morning and go, God, I forgot about so and so, And so what I've done is, and the publisher really liked the idea, and said a lot of writers are doing this now, is I created the 10 categories: 10 best projects, restoration projects, 10 this, 10 that, 10, and I really got risky here. And I said 10 best board members, 10 greatest volunteers. And sometimes I'd expand the list. And then you created a hashtag. And this hashtag goes to a website called the Presidio Alliance. And then it opens up, and there's another
The QR code?
10,000, pardon?
Is it the QR code you're referring to?
Yeah. It's a QR code, right? Sorry, not a hashtag, QR code. And it opens it up, and it's another 10 to 15,000 words. Some of these, when I say this is the best restoration project, well, obviously the chapel is going to be up there. Then I give details of why it was important, etc. And then I talk about the 10 greatest events, and you can imagine that getting the prince to come from Spain to come to your site is going to be near the top of the list. I hope people will forgive me if I put my daughter's wedding in the chapel as one of the top 10 events, but obviously I took her down the aisle, and I didn't put this in the top 10, but I've had all 3 of our grandchildren baptized in the Presidio Chapel as well. So,
if you see the book, you'll see the photo of Jerry at his daughter's wedding, giving her away in period costume. Right. So there's another reason to get a copy of the book.
Yeah, I hope so. Anyway, it's a very personal account, but I think it's a very important account beyond Jerry Jackman. It was my attempt to show, one, the importance of presidios, the importance of this presidio, how unique it was to be able to put this on a frontier. And then the big part of the story is how to bring it back and how to preserve it. And I'm really, I've made a contribution, so I'm not going to deny that I wasn't there. And I'm a total, devoted, dedicated presidio person. I just think it's just a really fun thing to be and have been involved with for my career. And I wouldn't there's certain points when I didn't feel that way when we were in the midst of political battles or struggling to raise money. But generally, overall, I realized I was fortunate to be where I was.
Well, it's first of all, it's a beautiful book with a lot of color photos in it. And then the background to the historical background about the presidio itself, about presidios, the relations that you mentioned between the Spanish, the soldiers, their backgrounds, the native people, and then the second part, which is your direct involvement with bringing this thing, taking control of this project, which had already been in the works, and then bringing it to fruition. It's an engaging read, and I really recommend it to anybody. And we'll definitely have links to it on the website when we post this podcast interview. But where can people get it if they're interested?
Yeah, well, obviously the number one place is Amazon. I know some people don't like to deal with Amazon, but Amazon, they do like 75% of the books sold in the United States, so it's there, and you can buy it at a somewhat discounted rate. There's a bookstore in Santa Barbara called Chaucer's, like Chaucer, the famous Chaucer poet. And you can just look that name up, and they actually, you can buy the book online from them if you don't want to buy it from Amazon. And it's available if you're in the Santa Barbara area. It's available at the bookstores here, the Book Den, out in Montecito, the bookstore there, the Book Loft in Sullivan. So it's definitely out there, and it's not a self-published book. It actually was, the publisher was quite interested in it. Reinhardt, of the famous Reinhardt family, felt that this was a story. He had actually spent some years in Santa Barbara and said nobody really told the story the way I was doing it with this narrative. So it's not an inexpensive book, but I do think it's got value as a coffee table book, but also there's some stories in there, and an important one that make the book maybe bump to a little bit higher level.
Well, I think one of the values of the book is giving the reader a picture of the fact that our history, the fact that there's still places that you can visit, see, and touch, etc., is not something you take for granted. It takes people who are really engaged and who put blood, sweat, and tears into it to maintain these places, to bring them back, and to fund them, to get the word out, to wrangle with the bureaucracy, all those kind of things that I think we kind of take for granted when we're standing, when we don't see behind the curtain. And you sort of give us this picture behind the curtain of a very important place for the history of California and the greater Southwest. So thank you for that. And I thank you for taking a little time to talk to me, let me interview you. And yeah, I hope it won't be the last one. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, maybe we'll come back and talk about the Getty Villa in Norman Neuberg in the future. That's an interesting story about a person who was very prominent in the California missions, but that will be a ways in the future. So.
Yeah. Well, Norman Neuberg is a really interesting personality that I think a lot of people need to know more about. And so we'll try and pencil that in. So thanks so much, Dr. Jarrell Jackman.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the California Frontier Podcast. If you liked what you heard, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, be sure to check out the California Frontier Project website at www.californiafrontier.net. If you have a question, a comment, or a suggestion, make sure and drop me a line at damian@californiafrontier.net.